Hello, friends. Greg Koukl here. Stand to Reason is the show. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm looking forward to chatting with you. 3 full hours for the full show. That's our first. Many markets only get 1 hour. Get the whole thing on podcast is my suggestion. Anyway, I look forward to chatting with you, and as you're getting in the queue, I want to tell you a little bit about my week. I froze up in Toronto this last week. I have not felt cold air like that in a long, long time. Now, many of you know I'm from the Windy City, Chicago. So I know what it's like to grow up in the cold and have tough winters. But, you know, I've been in Southern California for 40 years, and my blood is thin. And on Wednesday evening, when I got off the airplane and walked through the parking lot with my host, Tim Zub, took care of me for 4 days. Man, my face just about froze off. You ever have this thing? Well, I know you did. You have a Slurpee and you drink it too fast, or ice cream or something, you get the brain freeze. That very thing was happening to the outside of my face. I mean, it was actually painful. Not just uncomfortable, painful. Now, my phone, when I got off, said 0 degrees. But that's not centigrade, which would be 32 Fahrenheit. That's like 28 degrees below 0 by the centigrade scale or something like that. Anyway, it was really cold. But I had a great warm reception by the good people in Toronto, and I had a lot of different events, 8 different presentations I made, 2 of them at the University of Toronto. And I just want to share an insight with you, lest you think that I am less than human when it comes to these more challenging environments. I've been on 63 or 64 college and university campuses now, and a great number of them have been Christian, but a great number non-Christian as well. Most of the major state universities in the California area, Berkeley, UCLA, UCSB rather, Santa Barbara, UCSD, San Diego, UC Irvine. I've been to a lot of places. And then in the Midwest at Purdue and Ohio State and University of Illinois. And so I've had my share of encounters with the non-Christian audiences. And characteristically, it's gone really well. In fact, I'm a bit surprised when I think back on the history of the universities that I've spoken at. And yes, I've been challenged, no question. But I have been treated with respect. There hasn't been any need for security like there is once in a while with some speakers who are more conservative or religious, whatever. I've had a good experience, but even so, I still feel a bit nervous when I go in that environment. Now, part of the reason is that I always try to have Q&A after I make my opening speech, and this particular one was on bad arguments against religion. It's a talk I do a lot, and I do it in non-Christian environments, and basically the point I'm making to those who would disagree is that there are noble ways, that is, intellectually noble ways to go after the point of view that I defend, classical Christianity, the Judeo-Christian worldview, if you will. And I don't think they ultimately succeed, but I think that there are noble ways, like trying to disprove the existence of the soul or the existence of God or the existence of Jesus or the historical reality of the resurrection, etc. These are all part of the soft underbelly of Christianity. I make this point because Christianity is falsifiable in any of a number of ways. That's our soft underbelly, but it's a good thing, partly because I don't think any of these strategies succeed, but it does demonstrate that we are falsifiable, which means that we can also be substantiated. Evidence can falsify, evidence can verify. And that's a good thing for us. It's unusual for religions to be in a position of being able to verify something about their claims. However, by contrast, there are some ignoble ways of going about trying to dismiss the claims of theism in general, Christianity in particular, and this is what I highlight in a talk like that, saying there is no truth, for example, or that evil is a good argument against God, It's attacking the believer instead of his belief. So these are fallacious or empty or misdirected ways that I hope that people challenge us and feel comfortable in dismissing us. And I tell the audiences, I want to save you some trouble. Don't embarrass yourself using these strategies. Find another way. So it becomes a provocative talk for a non-Christian environment, an ideologically hostile environment, though, as I pointed out, the people are not, at least in my experience up till now, have not been characteristically hostile to me. So giving the talk is fine. It's easy. I can give a talk and leave. No challenge, no difficulty. But when I stay, which is what I want to do, and take Q&A, then there's risk for me, and this is why I feel a little uncomfortable in these circumstances. Now, look, Scripture says, gird your mind for action, okay? Do not fear them, Jesus says 3 different times in Matthew 10, talking about the opposition. Okay, I understand that. And I steel myself for the occasion, and being prepared, of course, is a huge benefit in situations like that. But you never do know what's going to come up, and you never know quite how to respond to a new thing. What if I make these bold assertions and then somebody raises an issue during the Q&A, and even if they do it nice, that ends up taking or appears to take the wind out of my sail? It could have a significantly negative effect on the whole evening. And I mean, I don't like being caught up short, caught flat-footed. I mean, for personal reasons, I don't like that, but that's not the most important thing. I don't want the gospel to be discredited. So when I go into an environment like that, there is this risk, and I'm willing to face it. And like I said, being prepared makes a big difference. And I am committed to, if I don't know the answer, to acknowledging that. And 2, however I deal with an issue, whatever it is that I have to say, I say it with grace and confidence and courage, that I'm even-handed in the way I treat the opposing ideas and in the way I treat the person objecting. Okay, so those, in a certain sense, those things make it easier for me. If I'm willing to say, gee, I don't know, I'm going to have to check that out, and I'll give you an example of that in a moment, then that communicates an even-handedness. I don't feel like I can't give at all. I can't acknowledge a good point. I can't acknowledge my own ignorance on a particular issue. And also, if I'm committed to treating people with grace, well, this is not only virtuous and obligatory for the Christian, it is also tactically sound. It leaves a good impression on people, even if they don't agree with what you say. Sometimes just encountering a thoughtful Christian who is gracious is itself a stone in someone's shoe and has a salutary effect, even if you haven't addressed the issue itself very effectively. In any event, there was during the Q&A, there was a challenge because I had made the claim that science cannot foreclose on religion. And I mean here in general, science can't prove there is no God, can't prove the supernatural doesn't exist. It can't prove there are no demons or no angels or no souls. Did I say that already? I don't know. But these are things that it can't directly inveigh against in principle. That is, it can't measure that world. What it can do is show that some things that might have been explained by an appeal to the supernatural can best be explained in other ways. But that doesn't mean that it's able to completely foreclose on the broader issues like the existence of God. And that was the only point I was making, since many atheists think that science has shown that religion is untenable. And science has somehow disproved religion, and nothing could be further from the truth. So, with having said that, I had a challenge from a nice man drinking tea, and he had some background in biology, and he challenged me on that particular point because if it could be demonstrated, for example, that Adam and Eve did not exist, and Adam and Eve are central as historical figures to the Christian narrative, then he suggested then you've got scientific evidence that does inveigh not just against a particular belief of Christianity, but seems to strike somewhat at the foundation. Now, I know that there are Christians who are orthodox in every other regard, but deny the historicity of Adam and Eve, and Dennis Lamoureux, for one, who I saw at ETS. I think they're wrong on that one, but it isn't a death blow to many Christians if it turns out that there was no Adam and Eve, but the Darwinian story is the true story. But and he explained as evidence that Adam and Eve did not exist, that it's not possible to create a large population of people, human beings, the world's population, from an original pair. That biology has shown conclusively that you need at least 200 individuals in order to have the genetic pool adequate to then have a much larger population of creatures, in this case human beings. So now he offered that to me in with kind of the tone of voice and attitude. Now, of course, you know this basic fact of biology, don't you? And if you don't, this is why we need biologists and not theologians talking about this. Now, of course, I agreed that we do need biologists, but I did have a few questions for him about this alleged fact. First, I'd never heard this, and I told him that. So I can't answer this in anything in a substantive way. But are you saying to me, I asked, that one man, that if everybody on earth was wiped out, except for me and another woman, let's just say my wife for the sake of discussion, keep it tidy, that we could not give birth, I mean, presuming we were of childbearing age and all that, early 20s, that we could not generate children that could then intermarry and generate more and more and more so that there was a massive population of human beings? My understanding is, and maybe you've never heard this, somebody can Google this up if you'd like, but I was at a state fair looking at the pigs, and they said if just one mother pig were allowed to reproduce and her offspring unrestrained, just at the natural rate, that within some unbelievably short period of time, and I'm thinking like, what, 3 or 4 years, something on that order, the whole face of the earth would be covered with pigs. Now, of course, you got a shorter gestation period. They got like litters of 8 and 10 and 12, and they can do this 2 or 3 times a year. So the math helps out there. But it seems the same thing could be true for human beings. It just would take longer because of the longer gestation period and the longer time to adolescence. And we do have human beings, so something happened, right? So on the one hand, that struck me as odd that this would be the claim. But here's another point, and again, this is something I'm thinking of just in a certain sense off the top of my head, not being familiar with the facts and willing to concede that, and therefore we'll just have to let this be a moot point, a debatable point, okay? And that, the 200, but I did have this question, and the question simply put is, where did the 200 come from? Where did the 200 individuals, which are the critical mass necessary to produce a massive population, where do they come from? Can one couple produce the 200 eventually? Well, if one couple can produce the 200, why can't the 200 then produce all the rest? Unless what you're suggesting, I asked the young man, and he said, well, this is where the process of evolution comes in. But then what you seem to be suggesting is that you have 200 human individuals who each have a separate phylogenetic history. That is, they each independently, through a series of ancestors that happened to develop through mutation and natural selection into human beings that could interbreed. And not just separate lines of evolution that produce the same thing, but they produce it at the same time in the same location. Now, doesn't that strike anybody as wildly implausible? And then I pointed out to him, maybe I do have to deal with this problem of 200 individuals, though I think those questions I just asked need to be answered. But you have another problem, and that problem is abiogenesis. That is, life from non-life. How does this whole ball game get started to begin with? And see, this is where I think we can, on this issue, we sometimes can get lost in the details or maybe distracted by minutia. Is this 200 individuals a concern? Well, maybe it is. And so then maybe somebody from our perspective has an answer to that. I mean, my understanding is that the genetic makeup of the human population seems to indicate that, at least with regards to women, in the mitochondrial DNA, they can trace it back to an original Eve. And this has been out for a couple of years, this information, from secular press, secular academics. So I know they're scratching their head. This looks a little funny because they call it mitochondrial Eve, in fact. And I think another assessment can be done with regards to that gives the conclusion about Adam. So there is a line of biological evidence that seems to be pointing, at least on one take of the evidence, to an original couple. So how does this 200 individuals work in? I don't know, but sometimes, like I said, if we're straining at these gnats, these little details, we swallow the camel of how does life get off on its own by itself to begin with. And here we're talking about something incredibly complex. And I know some are saying, well, that's not Darwinism. Darwinism is about living biological systems. We're not addressing that. Well, yes, you are. I mean, let's be fair. It isn't like you Darwinists are just looking at the development of life after it happens and are willing to say, yeah, life is pretty complex. God must have done that because it has all the signs and earmarks of a designer. You're not going there, are you? You're trying to find some materialistic, minimally, explanation, and many have tried to find a Darwinian explanation with mutation and natural selection. Applying here, though, it's difficult because you don't have reproductive systems until you have true biology and true life, but it's all part of the same enterprise. So that's a huge problem, and it's not gotten easier. It's gotten harder as time has gone on. The more we learn, the more difficult, the more indeed intractable it becomes. This idea of even the simplest life form evolving without direction. I'll have more to say about that later, but I guess I just want you to get a little picture of something. First, here's what happened last week, and here was an encounter I had, and there were lots of other questions, and they were interesting and productive and challenging, and I think on balance it went well. And not that I had all the answers, but I think on balance I acquitted myself well, and I left a good taste in people's mouths. I didn't convince everybody, but that's all right. You can't do that. But I want you to know that it was a little bit unnerving to have to do that. And then in the midst of it all, I had to admit I didn't know the answer to this question, but I knew that this particular question about the 200 individuals to create a population is not the only factor in the discussion, that there were some things about that claim itself that didn't make sense to me, so I could offer a challenge. And secondly, there are other problems that are huge, much bigger. And in fact, I told the young man, I said, well, maybe I've got the problem with the 200, but you've got the problem with abiogenesis. And your problem's a whole lot bigger than my problem. And so there is a sense in which you can sometimes rescue or say something worthwhile or helpful. Put a stone in someone's shoe, even if you can't answer the specific challenge that was on the table. In any event, I had great hosts. I actually spoke at the university there twice. I did training with the what really is the Campus Crusade for Christ contingent there at the University of Toronto. I did that afterwards. I I was able to speak at a church and do a few presentations there. I think we had 8 presentations all told. So those of you who are kind of following and praying about this, I appreciate it. And I survived the Arctic blast. Got back to sunny Southern California. It took me a couple days to thaw out, though, man. I just was wearing I brought my long underwear with me then, and I wore it for 2 more days. I just took it off yesterday, and tomorrow I get on the plane and go to Calgary, Canada, which is, well, last I looked, was 16 below zero. That's cold. That's even colder than Toronto. So I'll be there the next 4 days. Hopefully, by God's grace, I'll survive. But I'm looking forward to meeting with Jojo Rubin and the crowd up there and to trying to do something productive. All right, I'll take your calls here. Just in case you don't know, the number is 1-855-243-9975. Of course, you have to call during our live show, which is Tuesday nights from 4 until 7 and Los Angeles time. And I'll be getting to your calls after this. Stay with us.
Paul encourages us to be ready with an answer when someone asks for the reason for the hope we have in Jesus. We can help you be ready with those answers. Stand to Reason's website has thousands of pages of free and helpful resources on current issues and questions. At str.org, you'll find sound analysis and careful commentary on the many issues that challenge Christian thinkers in today's world. Topics like why Jesus is the only way, are science and faith compatible, same-sex marriage, and many others. Take a few moments to explore str.org. You can sort through the content by topic, author, and resource type. All of STR's speakers have articles, podcasts, and videos that provide practical answers to challenging questions. Visit the blog daily, read the latest Solid Ground, interact with the weekly challenge, listen to the weekly webcast. I'm convinced you'll come away from str.org with the accurately informed mind of a good ambassador for Christ. Try it today. That's str.org.
Greg Koukl here, one of the good guys, equipping you to think every weekend. Stand to reason. The enforcers just informed me that I got my temps wrong. In Calgary, it's only -2 in the afternoon. So that's comforting. But it's not nighttime yet. All right, let's go to our first caller, Orlando Beach. Chris, welcome.
Greg, how are you?
Good, thanks. I'm just finally warmed up again, and I got to get on a plane back to the deep freeze.
Yeah, in Florida, sometimes I wish for more diversity in weather, but other days I'm happy for the warmer weather here.
Yeah, look, it can get really cold in Florida. I know that my brother lives in Sarasota, and sometimes it's just it can get freezing. In fact, this recent Arctic blast that came down from the north, you guys got hit by it too, didn't you?
Yeah, we did, and I mean, for everywhere else it was pretty warm, but for us it felt like it was -32 degrees.
Yeah, right. You just get used to that warmer. But the thing is, this is the difference between Florida and Southern California. Florida can be warm in the winter, but it is so blistering hot in the summer, and it's humid. In Southern Cal, you have like 7% humidity or less, and it's just always kind of nice.
Yeah, I'm jealous.
All right, so enough of this Southern California weather snob stuff. What's on your mind, Chris?
I'm going to kind of talk out loud.
Generally, that's the way it's done.
Yeah, and then think out loud.
Think out loud, okay.
Yeah.
That's what I told my daughters. I said, keep your mouth shut while you're talking to me.
Yeah. I guess my question has to do with what a person, in order to still have saving faith, what they can still deny. And I ask this because there's a Christian artist I really enjoy, and I found out a while ago that they deny the Trinity, which caught me off guard. And so I did some research, and I found an interview with them, and they said they denied the Trinity because they believed that the Father was God, and they thought the Trinity taught that the Father and the Son were the same person, and that's obviously not true in the Bible, and therefore they said the Trinity was false. But insofar as everything else went, they were, I guess, within orthodoxy, but it was just their misunderstanding that was standing between them and accepting the Trinity. So I'm curious if a person like that can still be saved. And conversely, if you were to go into, an Orthodox church and ask a person, do you believe in the Trinity? Do you believe in the deity of Christ? And they would tell you, yes, oh, absolutely. And then you'd say, okay, well, what do you mean by that? What's the Trinity? What do you mean by Jesus is God? What do you mean by God? They might say, I don't really know. I've never really thought about it. Or they may say something that's really out in left field somewhere. So where does one draw the line on where, is there any wavering or ability to have an incorrect understanding and still have saving faith?
Sure. Well, think of the Philippian jailer for a minute, Acts 13, when the Philippian jailer asked about salvation. He said, "What must I do to be saved?" And do you remember how Paul responded?
Not off the top of my head.
Well, he said, "Believe in the Lord Jesus Christ and you will be saved." And so here is one statement that clarifies what's necessary for salvation. And it's not just believing in Jesus, but it's in believing in the Lord Jesus. And the statement, Jesus is Lord, was the earliest characterization of primitive Christianity. It's the thing that they all said from early on. But the claim that Jesus is Lord is itself an acknowledgement of the divinity of Christ. And there is quite a number of places where, how did the mother of my Lord come to me, Elizabeth says to Mary, the mother of my Lord. The word Lord can sometimes be understood as like sir. But this isn't the way it's being used in these passages, and it's clear from looking at it. How did the mother of my sir, come to me? It's just, it's the mother of God is the way Elizabeth is understanding what has happened to Mary and the child she's carrying. And we see this throughout the New Testament in many different ways. So it strikes me as difficult to be able to claim that Jesus is not the Lord. The Lord. Well, he's a Lord. No, he's not. The Scripture shows him as the Lord. To deny that he is the Lord, which would be a denial of his divinity, and still qualify for salvation based on what Paul told the Philippian jailer. Think also in Romans chapter 10. It says early on in the chapter, if we confess with our mouth Jesus as Lord and believe in our hearts that God raised him from the dead, you shall be saved. Now there it seems like there are a reaffirmation of believing in the divinity of Christ and also the addition of the resurrection. Jesus says in John 8, unless you believe that I am, and this is where the word he is included in your translations, and you'll find it probably italicized because that's not part of the original. It seems to be implied. But the original characterization is simply I am, or ego eimi in the Greek. Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. John 8. So this is another place that Jesus seems to be suggesting in fairly strong words that we need to, here it is, verse 24. Therefore I said to you that you will die in your sins, for unless you believe that I am, and in the marginal rendering, most authorities associate this with Exodus 3:14, I am who I am. Unless you believe that I am, you will die in your sins. And so these are just some of the scriptural references that seem to indicate that belief that Jesus is God is necessary for someone to be saved. Now, I think you put it in a helpful way that, you're asking some questions about people who are just confused, and the way you characterized this musician is that their group had a misunderstanding. Well, I think there can be some misunderstandings that are not lethal. even on this issue. There is what might be called a formal heresy and a material heresy. A formal heresy is when you press the issue of what they're saying, then then they are describing something heretical. But in actual substantive sense, what they don't believe what they're even saying. They probably got it right. They just don't know how to explain it. So some people who try to describe the Trinity use illustrations that actually describe a heretical notion of the Trinity called modalism. And so in a formal sense, they're making it that's a heresy, but they don't mean it that way. They're just confused on how to explain it. So the question is, with regards to the musician and his group, are they really misunderstanding? Or do they understand what orthodoxy teaches and they reject it? I suspect if it's a whole denomination, even if it's a small denomination, it's not just a misunderstanding. The kind of misunderstandings that I'm talking about that are formal but not material are usually done by individuals who just don't have the education to express themselves clearly. But when you have a denomination that's saying, no, Jesus isn't God because the Father's God, and then Jesus and the Father would be the same, which they're not, and so therefore there is no Trinity. I mean, there's enough information out about this, Chris, that I think it would be easy for them to realize that that's a misunderstanding of the Trinity. I could be mistaken, but my suspicion is that they understand the classical notion, but they are rejecting it for what turn out to be, I think, rather weak reasons, but they reject it nonetheless. And if they do reject it, I think this puts them in a bad spot. What think you?
Yeah, I agree. I've just always had it's always something I've toyed around with in my mind.
Mm-hmm.
So someone has to profess that Jesus is I am, but to what degree they have to understand it. I mean, in today's day and age, it's kind of hard to claim ignorance with the wealth of information that we have out there and before us. But if you go back X years ago, that wasn't always the case.
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's a safe assumption, and I'll tell you why. In fact, it's almost the other. One might argue, and I'm just tossing this out, I'm not going to make a fuss about it. One might argue it's the opposite. It's almost with the plethora of information, there's so many different competing ideas, it's easier for people to get confused, and also with the inability of people to think carefully, you're going to get a lot of nonsense too. But back in the day, the very first thing, if you count the Council of Jerusalem that's in the book of Acts, that would be the first. So then the second major council, the first ecumenical council at least, is going to be the Council of Nicaea. And that whole council was about the deity of Christ, whether Jesus was of one essence, homoousios or homoousios, of same essence or of a similar essence. Maybe I got my Greek backwards, but it doesn't matter. Most of you won't know if I made a mistake. The point was they fussed about this, and in fact, there was a saying around the time that the whole empire was in an uproar over a diphthong, which is a vowel combination, that made a difference in meaning. So here, everybody understood from early on that the deity of Christ was really critical, and they understood what was at stake. So it's an argument could be made that in the earlier days, people understood this better. Now there's confusion, and there shouldn't be confusion, because even if you disagree with the doctrine, at least you should have there's enough information available that you could at least characterize it right. But I guess I'm not that confident of that. I would rather err on the side of being conservative here. I'd rather say, you know what, from what I've offered so far, I don't think you can be a Christian and outright deny the deity of Christ. Now, I think you can be a Christian because you trusted Jesus in truth, and then you're still figuring out who this guy is. You just don't have you're brand new. But if you go on to deny the deity of Christ, well, I think that's a bad sign. That may be an indication that whatever was going on beforehand wasn't legitimate.
No, I agree. It's something that, like you said, stay conservative on, kind of a steer right to go straight.
Yeah.
Like I read Peter Kreeft, and he likes to say that he believes Socrates was saved because he pursued the truth.
Yeah,
insofar the best he could. And I'm like, I gotta be careful of that.
No, I am with you. That's Peter Kreeft is a Roman Catholic, and that's the Roman Catholic view, and that lots of different groups are saved and they don't know it. And why would I go in that direction? Because if I'm wrong, and I wrote an article about this available on our website called No Other Name. I don't know if that's still on our website as a solid ground. We might have pulled it because we have it in the booklet on pluralism, the Ambassador's Guide to Pluralism. But in any event, why would I want to go that direction? If I'm wrong, then I've given false hope to all kinds of people. And if you take the more conservative view, contra Kreeft in this particular case, and they took the narrower approach. Well, you sound more like Jesus to begin with, because Jesus was the one who said it was the narrow way. And secondly, if I'm mistaken, what harm have I caused? None. There's more people in heaven than I thought there was going to be. That's good news, right?
Right.
Yeah. So steer right to go straight. I like that. I'd not heard that before.
I stole that from Norman Geisler. So
is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I'll steal it from you, from Norm, then. So that's pretty good. But we all steal from each other in a certain fashion. So, all right, Chris, I appreciate your call.
No, I appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Okay, all the best. Let's go to break, and more coming up on Stand to Reason.
At Stand to Reason, we depend on the support of donors to carry on our mission to equip Christian ambassadors, and your non-cash donation items can help. You can transform your old cars, cell phones, or other items into ministry impact by donating them to Stand to Reason. Think of it. Because of your donation, Christians just like you will be able to effectively share their faith and change the lives of others forever. To make non-cash donations of all kinds to Stand to Reason, call iDonate at 877-897-4273. Or go to idonate.com and visit STR's page. They'll take care of everything for you and Stand to Reason. Just call them at 877-897-4273 or visit idonate.com. Thank you very much for making Stand to Reason's work possible.
All right, let's go back to the callers here, all lined up. Now, this is Adeniyi.
Oh, man, that was wonderful.
I did it, huh? Oh,
yeah.
My gosh. Oh, well, took a lucky shot. Have we talked before?
Excuse me?
Have we talked before?
Yes, we have.
Are you Guillaume, the friend of, did I say, what's the French word for William? Guillaume?
No, I'm not French.
Okay, wrong guy. The last guy who called from New York was also friends of this other former atheist, now a Christian, who lives in New York, which is unrelated to anything we're talking about, so forget I raised it.
Okay.
Adeniyi, what's up?
How you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Okay,
great.
In
warm Southern California.
Thank you for taking my call. I wanted to talk about something that I've noticed lately. I'm a huge fan of Christian rap music. Huh. And it seems that in this genre of music, generally everybody who is rapping on a Christian artist's song is also a Christian, and they are, upholding biblical virtues and things like that. Mm-hmm. It seems that a certain group of Christian rappers, in an attempt to try to reach not just the subgenre of Christian listeners, but secular listeners as well, mm-hmm. have started rapping with non-Christian artists. And mm-hmm. apparently this is causing some, turmoil within this subgenre of rap music. And I can't understand what would be the problem with a Christian trying to reach non-Christian listeners by making music with somebody who's not a Christian.
Yeah, on first blush, I don't understand what would be the problem well, the way you put it was with Christians trying to reach non-Christian listeners by working with non-Christian musicians. That put that way, I don't know how somebody could find fault, but there must be some other substantive. And by the way, I'm inclined to respond the same way you just responded. But I also know sometimes there's more to it than meets the eye, and so there might be something more substantive that has been raised with regards to this pairing. Mm-hmm. And I'd be curious to find out what it is. Certainly it can't be wrong for Christians as Christians to work with secular musicians as secular musicians. I mean, just the fact that Christians are working with secular folk, I mean, that happens all around in all kinds of other disciplines and businesses. That in itself can't be the problem. But I guess the question I would ask is, I wonder, is there something unique about this particular enterprise that is morally compromising or compromises the gospel because the Christian musicians are working together with the secular musicians? What do you think? Have you heard?
See, I listen, with a discerning ear. I literally search, doing Google search on the lyrics, and I don't see anything compromising in the statements of the rapper himself, the Christian rapper. Uh-huh. And I noticed from having heard the secular rapper on some secular songs that they don't curse on any of the songs, and they also don't say anything that is inconsistent with the gospel. So they're not necessarily converting to Christianity on this song, and they're also not saying anything against it. I guess.
Okay. That's good information for me. Second question. I'm presuming that in these cases it is the Christian who is then working under the non-Christian, not the other way around. Is that right?
No, in some instances, it is the non-Christian working under the Christian, as in, I'm a Christian rapper, I'm going to invite you, a secular rapper, we develop a relationship just because we're both musicians.
Right.
I'd like you to come and say some things on my song. Would you mind doing that? This is what the song is about, and I'll give you the freedom to write whatever you write. You want to write? Just know, where I stand and the audience that listens to my music, and the songs that I've heard. They don't violate, the Christian rapper is not compromising the gospel, as far as I can tell, and neither is the secular rapper saying anything that would offend, I think, a Christian.
Gotcha. So here when the secular rapper comes under the Christian rapper, so to speak, mm-hmm. He minds his manners. Okay, good. But when the Christian teams up with the non-Christian, in the non-Christian's kind of world, he still minds his manners.
Okay.
Is that what you were saying?
That's a separate. I recently heard of a song that a Christian rapper was on, in which I guess the Christian rapper was working under the secular rapper, mm-hmm. and while the Christian was still consistent, the secular rapper was not didn't mind his manners, to borrow your term.
Yeah. Well, and certainly in the first case, I don't see any problem at all. That is, when the Christian is front and center and the secular musician is joining him and minds his manners, fine. I don't see any problem there. I'm not sure even if it's problematic in the second case. It kind of depends a little bit, because there are all kinds of Christians who work for non-Christians who ply their trade in less than honorable ways. The Christian ends up participating, working for the company, even though the company, every company has questionable things happening, so I'm wondering if this falls into that kind of category. Anybody who works for Hollywood, come on, a Christian who works for Hollywood.
Yeah.
Let's just say you're a set designer or a sound man or a key grip or whatever it is that you do, high to low. There are things that end up happening there and in movies or whatever that are going to be less than Christian. So, it's not my view that you have to quit your job under those circumstances and go work, do something else. Maybe some people feel that way, but if the same rule could apply in the circumstance that you're describing when the Christian goes with the rapper and the rapper is a little bit more secular. Paul said that we aren't to go outside of the world. This is 1 Corinthians 5. We're not to judge those people in the world. We got to be in the world, though not of it ourselves, and that's where the gospel goes. So there's a place for us to be involved in that. I guess, arguably, there does come a point of complicity with the immoral elements of the final product, where the Christian just has to say no. I've been troubled, for example, when I hear that there are people who have Christian testimonies, and I'm not going to name any names right now, but there's some pretty big names who have Christian testimonies, huge names, Oscar winners. But then they play roles that are just, it's not just that they play bad guys, that doesn't bother me. It's just that in the playing of people who do things immoral in the story, they're actually doing things immoral. And when you have to act out a love scene, in some kind of realistic way, even if you don't, quote unquote, go all the way, you still are going too far than you ought to as a Christian man married to a Christian woman. You're over here doing your job, and that's just too much. So I think there is a line to be drawn, but I don't have a sense that this is the case in what you've described to me with regards to the Christian rapper.
If I can ask this, because I've been reading, comments, and there really seem to be some, sincere meaning Christians who are totally opposed to this. And one thing I could glean is that they're concerned that, rapping with a secular artist can somehow cause them to stumble, somehow hold this secular artist as somebody that should be listened to, or like a friendly somebody friendly to Christianity, when in fact they probably aren't. They've got theology that's all wrong and beliefs that are inconsistent with Christianity, and that might cause some to stray away.
Yeah, I can see that. I think it's a judgment call. It strikes me as a little bit extreme if you have a non-Christian on your, even a well-known rapper on part of your team or whatever, that means that Christians are going to fall away from the faith. If that's all it takes, maybe the Christian didn't have a very strong or genuine faith to begin with. But
he was one of the seeds that fell in the thorns, I guess.
Yeah, right, possibly. I don't want to make light of this. I do think, like you said, there are very sincere Christians who have strong opinions on each side of this, and they're principled, but whether they're the right opinion or not is another matter. So I think this is one of those things that may be a jump ball for a lot of people, and you just got to kind of give your wisdom such as it is, and then just let the individual Christian performer in this case make his decision about what he thinks is best. I mean, it may be that there's all kinds of other good fruit that comes about through this partnership. Hey, look you know who Randy Stonehill is?
No, I'm sorry, I do not.
Okay, well, he was one of the founding fathers of Christian music, contemporary Christian music. They didn't even call it contemporary Christian music back then, but this is during the Jesus movement, Randy Stonehill. And do you know who Keith Green is?
Keith Green?
Yes.
No, I'm sorry.
Okay, well, in the same category, Tom's chuckling here because both these guys were huge in the 70s, but they also left their mark, especially Keith Green. The first time I saw Keith Green, he was playing with Randy Stonehill in a small church, and Stonehill was a Christian and Keith Green was not. Now, for a lot of people who hear this, because Keith Green was such a huge spiritual force in the late 70s, in the early 80s, he got killed in a plane crash in 1982. They are stunned to think of him, maybe thinking, "God, you saw him before he was a Christian? Wow!" Because he took on almost prophetic stature. And if you're a musician or you like music, you should just find some of the Keith Green stuff. He was an unbelievable pianist, and he was very, very crazy, wild. Maybe his style won't appeal to you, but he was unbelievably gifted, really had a prophetic voice. But at that event, he was not a Christian. He was there because Randy Stonehill had a friendship with him, and Randy was working on him to come to Christ. And it turned out that Keith Green, next time I saw him, he was a Christian, and the next time after that, and pretty soon he completely eclipsed Randy Stonehill in terms of popularity and significance and impact. And Stonehill was a big name. Yeah. So I don't mean I don't mean like he became a bigger star. I mean he eclipsed him with regards to spiritual impact. So here is something wonderful that came out of Randy Stonehill's efforts in the life of Keith Green, and part of that entailed, maybe it didn't require it, but it entailed him having Keith play at this concert. Keith got a little wild at this concert, and it was a very small venue. There was probably 200 people there in a basement of a church. So back in the day, this kind of thing took place. But so maybe there's a counterexample for some.
I have one last question. Some of this particular, I guess, rap companies' images, their artwork, seem to have been incorporating some, I guess, dark images or images that are often associated with the occult. And they are not, they are Christians, they profess to be Christians, and people have taken issue with that as well. My position is that, God can redeem anything, that's even right. Images that other people have taken and used and associated with non-Christian or evil things.
Yeah,
so
look
is that objectionable as well, or what?
No, I'm with you in principle on this. I do think there may be some judgment calls where you're going to say, I'm just not going to go there. But the fact that Christians are employing some of these things, it could sanitize it a little bit, have a salutary effect. Now it's not going to be associated with the occult. Now it's associated with this Christian. That might be a set of crosses. I'm not sure in the ancient past, even before the time of Christ, but I do know that circumcision was practiced by the Egyptians before it was practiced by the Jews.
Yeah.
And what God did is he invested it with new meaning. So I think that kind of thing is possible, and therefore that practice could be appropriate under some circumstances. But I do want to, what I don't want to do is kind of draw this, well, there is a the Egyptians and circumcision, they did it, it can be redeemed, and so then that means every adaptation or adoption of some of the secular stuff is justifiable. I mean, sometimes we just have to use common sense.
Okay.
And we just have to say, well, that particular characterization right here, the use of it, is that going to be helpful or harmful? When in doubt, don't. I guess this is Paul's advice. If it violates your conscience, look, Paul says, even if the thing itself is not wrong, if you think it's wrong, well, then don't do that, because that's going to wound your conscience. For you, it's going to be sin. And it's better to guard your conscience in that regard until you have a genuine change of thinking about it. So I guess like was said in the earlier caller that I talked with, I guess the last one, we were talking about a different issue, but he said something like steer right to stay on center. That is, err on the side of being conservative in some of these issues. If you're not sure about it, well, then be more careful. Then be more better say no than say, yeah, maybe it'd be all right, and then have it look bad. But by the same token, Paul said that we should not be judging Christians who are exercising an appropriate liberty. Just because it may look bad or somebody may stumble or whatever, that's a choice that the individual Christian has to make. In a lot of these cases, it creates bigger problems when we're just trying to find fault and exercising or leveling a judgment that's inappropriate. And so who are you, O man, to judge the conscience of another, I think is the way Paul put it in one place.
Okay.
So those are the factors involved there.
Okay.
All righty?
All right. Thanks so much for taking my call.
Adiniyi.
Yes.
All right. See you. Talk to you next time.
All right. God bless.
Thanks. Bye. Yeah. These calls are sometimes hard. I don't mean the phone call. I mean these judgment calls are not always easy, friends. And I guess we are faced with these kinds of things all the time. And here we are now with rap music. 40 years ago, it wasn't rap music. There was no such thing. It was, rock and roll or something like it, rhythm and blues. It was all of the hot stuff of the 60s and 70s, and then all of a sudden Christians started doing it too. And if you are not over 50 years old, you probably are not going to remember this, but contemporary music or questions like worldly type music, and that was like having a guitar on stage. If you had a guitar on stage, just a guitar, acoustic or other, I mean, not even electric, you were pushing the envelope, and that was a big deal. And people were wondering, oh, my goodness, what's happening? We're just like the world. Well, I don't care if we're like the world in cultural things that don't matter, that are non-moral. In fact, I think we should be like the world in that regard. Paul said, I have become all things to all men in order that by all means I might win some. Now, he did not mean he became immoral. He said, as a Jew, I became like a Jew, though not under the law. I acted like I was under the law. Like as a Greek, to the Greeks, I became like a Greek. So I tried to conform to their cultural elements, which were not, they had no moral ramifications in themselves. I tried to conform as much as I could in order to make the gospel more palatable to them. He drew the line at morality, but he was quite flexible in other things, and I think we can take a lesson from that. All right, friends, that's the end of our hour. I'll be back with more, 2 more hours on Stand to Reason. Stay with us.